folks, and welcome to the show. My name is Asa Morris, and this is Strangeness, Season 2, Episode 6. I haven't decided how long this season is going to run. 12 episodes? 20? I think what I'm going to do is run up to Thanksgiving and then come back in January. So however many shows that is. We'll do 2 seasons a year, maybe, with month breaks between them. I don't know. We'll figure it out. Anyway, let's get the business out of the way. Make sure you hit up the link tree in the show notes for all the links to all the things, the merch, the socials, the YouTube stuff, and, of course, the Patreon. Every little bit helps, and the more successful the Patreon is, the more successful we can be. You know the deal. Anyway, I hope you are all doing well and staying safe. I recently took some time to myself to celebrate my birthday, which was quite nice, and in fact, something great happened. 2 people who I love very much came together to buy me quite a nice new PC, and I'll tell you, I'm not super used to having nice things, and I'm definitely not used to having such nice things done for me. And this whole PC business has really been stressing me out, as I'm sure you have picked up on. So when I received the gift, I tell you, I damn near cried, to be totally honest with you. I cannot express how grateful and thankful I was and am. So, thank you. Anyway, I was kind of back and forth about what this episode was going to be about. I have a long list of topics on my phone that I want to cover this season, but none of them really felt like the thing for this week. None of them, felt quite right. So I ended up falling back on something that I've personally wanted to go and investigate myself for quite some time now, and was hoping to talk about after I was able to do that. But alas, that is not what is going to happen, because today we are getting into the Dark Watchers of Big Sur, California. Now, this is the 3rd entity/cryptid episode in a row, and I am aware of that, and I don't want to focus the show on solely weird creatures, but, it all comes in flaps. Next episode, we'll talk about, Mel's Hole, and why it's just a fairy tale. Or is it? If you don't know what Mel's Hole is, sure, I'll do an episode on that if you want me to. It's not nearly as gross as it sounds. Well, it's not nearly as gross in the way that most people think when I say Mel's Hole. Anyway, Dark Watchers. I first heard about the Dark Watcher phenomenon on Reddit a number of years ago. Funny enough, it was via a YouTube video on Mario games from Did You Know Gaming. On one of the levels, if I remember correctly, out of view of the player, but accessible through no clipping, which in very simplified layman's terms, that's using command prompts to move yourself around the level freely. You can see on one of the mountain peaks a handful of shadowy figures just watching the player progress through the level. Obviously a cool but weird thing to add. So in the comment section, people link to the real life version of that, and most likely the inspiration, Big Sur's Dark Watchers. So what are the Dark Watchers? Well, I can give you a description of them, but I certainly can't tell you what they are. Basically, these are tall and shadowy silhouettes of humanoid forms, sometimes wearing hats or capes, that stand atop ridgelines and hills of the Santa Lucia Range at or near twilight mostly, and they watch people pass by. Some folks have even noted that the Watchers will move their heads or bodies to get a better look. They're never seen up close and often disappear if the passerby looks away and back again. Another notable fact, if we can call these facts, is that they rarely, if ever, appear to anyone carrying anything more than primitive gear. For example, no cell phones, no cameras. Convenient, but also consistent, because even before cell phones existed, this was part of the lore. At first, I obviously wanted to view this whole thing as something intended to drum up tourism, as if Big Sur needs something like that. But the fact of the matter is, the legends of the Dark Watchers go back a long way. In researching this episode, I found a number of references to folklore from the Chumash tribe in what became California that supposedly described the Watchers going thousands of years back. However, I was unable to find any actual mention of something like that in Chumash stories. I did find some vaguely similar things, creatures that live in the underworld and come to the middle world, which is our world, at night and cause trouble, but that's not the same thing at all. So where do the references to the Chumash people come from? Well, I'm not really sure, but to me it looks like at some point someone just made it up to give the story more credence. Okay, well, at this point, it's not looking very reliable. So what's next in the history? Well, it still goes back quite a ways, all the way to the Spanish colonization of California in the 1760s. The Spanish settlers referred to the beings as vigilantes oscuros, literally translating to dark vigilantes. Later, as California became populated with the then colonial American people, they also began writing down experiences regarding the Dark Watchers and of being uneasy in their apparent presence. In the area, it just became fact that they exist and they watch you, and to be blunt, not to fuck with them. Sage advice in any setting, in my opinion. Later in 1937, we get the poet Robinson Jeffers, who, in his collection, Such Counsels You Gave to Me in Other Poems, refers blatantly to the Dark Watchers, stating, he thought it might be one of the Watchers, who are often seen in this length of coast range, forms that look human to human eyes, but certainly are not human. They come from behind ridges to watch. He was not surprised when the figure turning toward him in the quiet twilight showed his own face. Then it melted and merged into the shadows beyond it. And only a year later, the great John Steinbeck, in his short story Flight, also referenced them. In the story, a young boy must flee to the Santa Lucia Range after killing a man, and his mother gives him this advice. When thou comest to the high mountains, if thou seest any of the dark watching men, go not near to them nor try to speak to them. So obviously, these are both creative writers who are taking local lore and adding it to their own creation, as many people do. Clearly, we can't count these as evidence of the existence of the Dark Watchers. But we can count it as evidence of the local population taking it seriously. Steinbeck's mother, for example, Olive Hamilton, believed in bringing the Dark Watchers gifts and would on occasion bring fruit and nuts to Mule Deer Canyon in the range, possibly with the intention of meeting them, and shortly thereafter she would discover flowers in the gifts' place. According to her grandchild Thomas Steinbeck, she was not someone who generally believed in or made a big deal about fantastic things. To use his words, she was not a fabulist, but she believed firmly in the Dark Watchers. The stories continue today, the sightings, the lore, some of which is far more malevolent than the general ideas that we have discussed so far. But if that's a concern to you, I refer you back to the original statement, don't fuck with them. The big questions though, what do they want? Why are they there? Are they guarding something? Do they need something from us? What the hell is going on? Obviously, we can't answer most of these questions. Not yet, anyway. But we can kind of come close to some answer. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to take a look at possible explanations. So sit tight. Welcome back, folks. Quick catch up, slow mustard. For at least a few centuries, people have been reporting shadowy humanoid figures atop the ridges of the Santa Lucia Range that disappear quickly. So, why? Okay, so this is why I wanted to get out there myself before really covering this topic. There are a number of interesting and plausible explanations here, so let's just dive right into it. First up, the answer I went to immediately: pareidolia, seeing shit that isn't there. The Dark Watcher reports are almost exclusively in low light settings. Our brains fill in the gaps whether we want them to or not. In my opinion, pareidolia is the single biggest reason for cryptid sightings in history, assuming that they aren't real. I mean, it's no fault of ours. We evolved to constantly be on the lookout for dangerous shit, but unfortunately, it makes eyewitness accounts that much less credible. However, I don't necessarily think that's the answer in this situation, at least most of the time. Next up, and I'm doing these in order of what I think is happening, lying. I mean, we have to always include this explanation in everything. These are local lore, tall tales, people want attention, etc. Whether it's all in good fun or done for any selfish reason, it's the same thing, making stories up. And I think it's obvious that at least a handful of these stories must come from this explanation. Next up, we have the Brocken Spectre. The Brocken Spectre is highly likely, in my opinion. Basically, this is an optical illusion that happens when the sun is behind the observer and there is any amount of mist or fog in the air, even a small amount, and a shadow of the observer is cast into the distance, creating a figure that seems tall and shadowy and menacing. Sometimes this effect is obvious if there is a lot of fog or mist, but other times not so much. This also explains why the figures tend to disappear quickly. If the fog or mist moves away from the affected area, the shadow will disappear. The Brocken Spectre also is particularly probable at twilight when the sun is near the horizon. Interestingly, another writer, Lewis Carroll, wrote a little bit about the Brocken Spectre, which was named after the same illusion confounded people around Brocken Peak in Germany. So, again, I find this to be the most likely candidate, in addition to this last explanation: infrasound. Infrasound is a low-frequency sound below the audible range of 20 Hz that can have physical and psychological effects on nearby humans. Paranoia, anxiety, insomnia, and panic are all common symptoms. If a person is close enough to the origin point, infrasound can even cause the eyes to vibrate and create visual hallucinations. I'm not going to play it right now. I believe it's a little cruel, but if you are feeling brave, put on some headphones, crank up a decent stereo, go to YouTube and look up the ghost frequency. See how long you last. Essentially, over a period of time, it will make you hallucinate and panic. It is not super fun. Anyway, infrasound is most commonly reported to be caused by nearby ocean waves or wind passing through mountain ranges. You know, those two things that Big Sur has an abundance of. So I think between infrasound and the Brocken Spectre illusion, pareidolia, and just lying, this explains the Dark Watchers. Although, as one article I read while researching this episode stated, if you were to ask Steinbeck's mother, she'd reply that illusions don't bring you flowers. It should also be noted that the Dark Watcher phenomenon isn't exclusive to Big Sur or Brocken Peak. There are similar stories and reports basically everywhere: the Alps, the Andes, Australia's Great Dividing Range, but some aren't even near mountains or water. Texas has quite a few reports out on the very flat, home-on-the-range type of landscape. John Keel, in his book Strange Creatures from Time and Space, wrote that in Nova Scotia in April 1969, a giant 18-foot-tall figure was seen by many residents on the outskirts of Berwick, according to their evening news. It was allegedly a tall, very dark form seen striding about the landscape at a speed of about 20 miles per hour. After the initial witnesses reported the phantom, as it became known, local police had to assign cars to the area. Now, for most of this episode, we have pictured the Dark Watchers being still and simply observing and disappearing. However, I did keep seeing phrases in articles such as, "they move quickly." So, was Keel describing something similar in relatively flat Nova Scotia? Maybe. Either way, I still want to go to Big Sur and get a good look for myself. I mean, I saw the Marfa lights, and after a few months of pondering, I've got what I think is a rational explanation. So hell, maybe I can get to the bottom of the Dark Watcher lore. We'll see. Anyway, that's our show. I know it was a short one. I promise it'll be a little longer next time. Thank you so much for hanging out, whether again or for the first time. As I said before, make sure to hit up the link tree in the show notes for all the links to all the things, especially the Patreon. Also, swing over and check out my friends at the Graveyard Goons for some spooky chuckles, and definitely check out Iron Cthulhu Apocalypse's links. They, as always, did the music underneath the segments. Not the other music though, the intro, middle, outro. I did those for a film that never got released and figured, well, they need a home. Anyway, that's the business. I hope you enjoyed the show. Take care of yourselves and the people around you. I'll see you in 2 weeks. From a distance. On a hilltop.